About the crowds. Well, at this time in the show, we always show you something that's trending on social media. How about this? You couldn't get...
The tennis world was already talking about the crowds, but one statistic revealed just how extraordinary the Alex Eala phenomenon had become. At the 2026 Australian Open, 2 pre-tournament press conferences were uploaded to YouTube. One featured the reigning world number 1. The other featured a 20-year-old Filipina who had yet to establish herself among the sport's elite. The results surprised everyone. Eala's press conference attracted more than 171,000 views, while the world number 1's drew just 9,000. That wasn't just a difference in numbers. It was a sign that something bigger was happening. Alex Eala wasn't simply arriving at Wimbledon as the number 29 seed. She was arriving with the hopes, pride, and unwavering support of an entire nation behind her. Meanwhile, the world number 1 entered the tournament under a different spotlight, facing constant questions about expectations and public perception. If you followed Alex's journey from her breakthrough in Miami, watched her dominate the junior stage, and believed in her long before the tennis world fully recognized her potential, then you're in the right place. This story isn't just about rankings or statistics anymore. It's about the rise of a player who has become the heartbeat of Filipino tennis. So, set the rankings aside for a moment. Just 5 days before Wimbledon began, Alex Eala captured the first grass court title of her professional career in Birmingham, proving that her game could thrive on one of tennis' most demanding surfaces. 2 weeks earlier, she had already turned heads in Berlin by defeating world number 2 Aryna Sabalenka before putting together an impressive run to the semifinals. In only a matter of weeks, Eala transformed from an exciting young prospect into one of the most closely watched players heading into the biggest tournament of the summer. 7 minutes, the commentator said. An absolutely stunning performance from Alex Eala. Only days later, on June 27th, Eala spent 2 focused hours practicing on the Arangi courts before stepping onto the Wimbledon grounds as the first Filipino player ever to earn a Grand Slam singles seed. It was a milestone that represented far more than a ranking. It reflected years of progress, belief, and the growing presence of Filipino tennis on the world stage. Now compare that journey with the atmosphere surrounding the top seed. While Eala spent media day answering questions about the support of her country and the excitement surrounding her rise, Aryna Sabalenka faced a very different conversation. The headlines focused on pressure, expectations, and the emotional aftermath of recent setbacks. In interviews published before Wimbledon, Sabalenka openly discussed how difficult the weeks after Roland Garros had been, describing a period in which she struggled to regain confidence and motivation. The contrast could hardly have been greater. One player arrived carrying the hopes of an entire nation. The other arrived carrying the weight of being world number 1. What made the difference even more remarkable was that Sabalenka never publicly addressed Alex Eala or the growing wave of Filipino support. Yet that silence only highlighted how much attention Eala was already attracting. While the reigning world number 1 answered questions about criticism and expectations, Eala was being asked about her fans, her country, and even which Tagalog phrase she might one day say if she lifted the Wimbledon trophy. The numbers had already hinted at this shift months earlier. During the Australian Open, Eala's pre-tournament press conference became one of the most watched player interviews on YouTube, drawing around 171,000 views. By comparison, several of the sport's biggest stars, including Carlos Alcaraz, Coco Gauff, and Aryna Sabalenka, recorded significantly smaller audiences. It wasn't simply online curiosity. It reflected the arrival of an entirely new fan base. That excitement soon became impossible to ignore inside Melbourne Park. Thousands of Filipino supporters packed the grounds, creating enormous lines outside Court 6, where Eala had been scheduled to play. The queue stretched far beyond what organizers expected for an outer court, leaving broadcasters and journalists surprised by the scale of the turnout. The tournament eventually acknowledged that the scheduling had underestimated the demand, promising to learn from the experience. It was a rare admission that one young player had generated a level of interest the organizers had not anticipated. By the time Wimbledon arrived, that lesson had clearly been learned. Eala entered the championships as the number 29 seed, becoming the first Filipino in Grand Slam history to be seeded in singles. More than a personal achievement, it marked another step in the growing recognition of her place among the sport's rising stars. Momentum had been building for weeks. On June 22nd, she captured the Lexus Birmingham Open title after battling back to defeat Nikola Bardonkova in a dramatic three-set final. It was her first professional grass court championship and another sign that her game could succeed on every surface. What happened after the match resonated just as deeply. Standing with the trophy, Eala chose to speak directly to the Filipino fans who had traveled to support her. She thanked them in Tagalog before sharing a message that quickly spread across social media. Home is not defined by geography, but by the people who stand beside you. For many supporters, those words became one of the defining moments of her season. The relationship between player and fans had evolved into something much larger than results on a scoreboard. Her performances reinforced that feeling. Earlier in Berlin, Eala defeated world number 2 Aryna Sabalenka before adding another impressive victory over Aryna Sabalenka to reach the semi-finals. Although her run ended against Linda Noskova, the tournament proved she could challenge and defeat the very best players on grass. The conversation had changed. Crowds were no longer cheering for a promising young talent hoping to break through. They were cheering for a legitimate contender capable of upsetting the biggest names in the sport. At the same time, attention surrounding Sabalenka continued to focus on recovery, confidence, and the pressure of maintaining her position at the top of the rankings. The contrast between the two stories became one of the defining narratives entering Wimbledon. Experienced voices across tennis also began taking notice. Analysts and former professionals pointed to the extraordinary crowds following Eala from tournament to tournament, suggesting that her popularity had become a significant factor in the atmosphere surrounding major events. Then came the draw. Sabalenka landed in the top quarter. Eala was placed in the third quarter, meaning the two could only meet if both reached the championship match. For Eala, it created an intriguing opportunity. A strong opening performance could set up increasingly high-profile matches as the tournament progressed, offering another chance to prove that her rapid rise was no coincidence. The stage was set. One player entered Wimbledon defending her place at the top of the rankings. The other arrived with momentum, belief, and the support of millions who believed they were witnessing the beginning of something historic. Aryna Sabalenka's biggest challenge heading into Wimbledon wasn't coming from across the net. It was happening everywhere else. On the court, she remained the player everyone was trying to beat. Off the court, however, much of the conversation had shifted toward Alex Eala. The Filipino star was drawing massive crowds, generating extraordinary online interest, and forcing tournament organizers to rethink how they scheduled her matches. Remarkably, the two players were placed on opposite halves of the draw, meaning they could only face each other if both reached the championship match. That contrast says something about where women's tennis is heading. For decades, the sport has largely revolved around its traditional powerhouses in Europe and North America. But Alex Eala represents something different. She comes from a nation of more than 100 million people and a global Filipino community that passionately supports its athletes wherever they compete. In the United Kingdom alone, thousands of Filipino fans had marked Wimbledon on their calendars the moment the draw was announced, ready to fill the stands every time Eala stepped onto the grass. This wasn't simply another promising young player attracting attention. It was an entirely new audience finding its place in professional tennis. The schedule ahead only added to the excitement. A first-round meeting with Renata Zarazua opened the campaign, with a possibility of even bigger challenges waiting deeper in the tournament. Beyond Wimbledon stood the US Open Summer Swing, followed by another Australian Open where expectations surrounding Eala would be dramatically different from the year before. Yet her rise has never been a perfect story. Earlier in the season, she experienced difficult defeats. She lost in the opening round of the Australian Open after taking the first set in dominant fashion. Roland Garros ended sooner than she hoped. Bad Homburg also brought disappointment just before Wimbledon. What stood out was her response. Rather than making excuses, Eala accepted the result with honesty. She explained that the conditions had been challenging and said she had simply done the best she could on the day. It was the kind of answer that reflected maturity rather than frustration. Only a few days later, she answered with her tennis. She lifted the Birmingham trophy, proving once again how quickly momentum can change in this sport. Look back over the season, and the milestones tell the story. Enormous viewing numbers during the Australian Open, unforgettable crowds around Court 6, a championship speech delivered in Tagalog, a breakthrough victory over one of the world's top-ranked players in Berlin, and a historic achievement as the first Filipino player ever to earn a Grand Slam singles seed. Meanwhile, the reigning world number 1 arrived at Wimbledon carrying the pressure that comes with defending the top ranking. Eala arrived carrying something entirely different, the expectations and pride of millions of supporters who saw her success as a national moment. There is no debate about Sabalenka's credentials. She has earned her place at the top of the sport through outstanding results and consistency. But Eala has become one of the most compelling stories in tennis, attracting an energy that few players can match. Every appearance brings louder crowds, greater anticipation, and growing belief that something special could happen. With the draw keeping the two stars apart until a potential final, the tournament suddenly carried two separate storylines moving toward the same destination. Now, the question belongs to the fans. Can Alex Eala reach the second week at Wimbledon? And if she does, we'll capture the bigger headlines: the world number 1 defending her crown, or the young Filipino star inspiring an entire nation as she chases history. Whatever the answer, one thing is clear: Alex Eala has already become one of the defining stories of this Wimbledon, and the journey is only beginning.